like to call the Boston Region MPO's Unified Planning Work Program Committee to order this morning. I'll start off by reading the accessibility statement. So this meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Matt Archer. Is that correct, Sandy?
I think Jonathan is going to be, I know Matt's going to be here for most of the meeting, but I think Jonathan's going to be the primary contact today.
Okay. Yes. So if you require any additional accommodations in order to participate, please contact Jonathan Church, MPO staff, at jchurch@ctps.org. Move on to the roll call here. So I'll do a roll call to identify attendance by board members. And I'll start off with myself here. I'm MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning, Ben Muller. Anyone from MAPC here today?
Yes, Eric Barassa with MAPC. Hello.
Hey, Eric. Town of Arlington.
Yes, this is Daniel Amstutz with the Town of Arlington.
Thank you, Daniel. BPDA. Okay. BTD.
Tom Kadzis, City of Boston, Transportation Department.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Hi.
City of Framingham.
Eric Johnson, City of Framingham here.
Thank you, Eric. Town of Medway. City of Newton.
Koza, City of Newton.
Okay, thank you, David. Town of Norwood.
Tom O'Rourke, Town of Norwood.
Thank you, Tom. City of Somerville.
Tom Bent, City of Somerville.
Thank you, Tom. And RTAC.
Leonard Dickens here.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Looks like we have a full house today. So we'll move on to the next agenda item here, which is public comment. Are there any members of the public who'd like to comment? If you'd like to, please raise your hand and I'll call on you in the order I see you. And if you have written comments, you can provide them to sjohnston@ctps.org. That's Sandy here on the call. Looks like I have Rachel Benson.
All right, first one on. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rachel Benson, Director of Planning and Economic Development in Rentham, and I'm here to support the project on your list as M4, the Swap Warehousing Logistics and Mitigation Study. The Swap region and other suburban areas have seen a steady increase in these e-commerce warehousing facilities, and the lack of tools and resources to address the immediate as well as the long-term impacts of these facilities on our infrastructure and residents. The proposed study will assess the existing conditions of the area and create a comprehensive mitigation strategy with long-term action items to mitigate these traffic impacts. The plan will not only help the Swap region and Holliston with this influx, but will be a plan that can be transferable to other communities in the Commonwealth that are having the same experiences and hopefully someday lead to a more holistic and regional review process. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Rachel. Any questions for Rachel? Okay, so move on. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'm just curious, is the, I don't know, to tell you the truth, does anybody have experience with the ITE, with the, the development numbers for something like that? I don't know if video stores are still on the books, but this is sort of a new land use. I'm just curious if anybody's got a handle on that or whether any of the traffic predictor models have a handle on that.
Rachel, looks like you're ready with an answer.
I was going to say that as far as it's an issue that we have with the ITE is that there's not a real good estimate for these, but I will let Eric Barassa, who's here also, talk any more about it, who's helping out.
Yeah, sorry, I can't find my raise the hand button, but we just put out just a few weeks ago, actually, a big study looking at the growing impacts of e-commerce in Massachusetts. And we kind of looked at national trends. We looked at as much data as we could find. I think the biggest issue is that these like warehousing and distribution sites are growing at an exponential rate. So in the past year, like Amazon alone has doubled its like footprint in Massachusetts. And there are dozens of other sites being proposed. A lot of them are along like the 495 corridor. And I think one of the issues that the municipalities are finding is that there's a lot of places that are, permitted for warehousing. And then they don't realize that then it's an e-commerce company. And like the trip generation, Tom, to your point, is and the traffic patterns are very different for these types of services. So definitely, more like, understanding this issue, sort of more data. That's the other thing, that we just don't really have good data about the impact of these sites. So I think more quantitative data, and then understanding therefore what some of the mitigation impacts could be, how we could even plan these sites, at a regional or sub-regional level. Right now, I think the municipalities are just seeing a lot of these coming, and they're reacting, right? That's the opposite of planning, is reacting. So, we think this is a potentially good one to try to get our arms around and see what sort of things could be done, both at kind of the regional, state level, but then what are recommendations for cities and towns? Because right now, I think a lot of them are just going to be saying, no, like pushing back, no, we don't want these sites, or so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was curious, and thanks for the feedback. Yeah, it seems like a really important issue. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next up on the list, I have Representative Ciccolo.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back in front of the MPO and to see so many familiar faces and friends. I'm here to speak to the study proposed as T10 in your chart, which is intended to help create first mile, last mile shuttle routes by looking at innovative financing that currently doesn't really exist in the Commonwealth, except for sort of on an ad hoc basis. I think you're all familiar with the struggles that suburban mobility routes have in getting off the ground. And we often see grants that are made by the MPO and other state agencies that help these shuttles get started, and then they fizzle out due to lack of sustainable ongoing funding. So this study will look at what's happening across the country in public-private partnerships with the private sector property owners, the municipalities, and the state when they collaborate. And it will help develop sort of best practices so that the planning for those shuttles can get done up front. As a corollary, I've proposed legislation that has been resubmitted this session. I'm forgetting my HD number here, but I'll get that for you in a second. But I've proposed transit improvement districts in the Commonwealth as a mechanism to allow cities and towns to follow a process. And the brainchild for this came from watching what we did here in Lexington. I represent the 15th Middlesex, which is Lexington and Woburn, and we created a shuttle that was highly successful called the Rev Shuttle. You may be familiar with it. It did receive state funding initially, but when the funding ran out, the community had to scramble to figure out how to sustain it and continue the project. We then decided to appropriate our own funds municipally, and we were working with the property owners. And once that was put in place, we were able to insist that the shuttle be open to the public, which was not the case when it was initially created as an employee shuttle. So I don't think this group needs to be reminded that we need to get more people onto transit routes. In my district alone, there are 7 access points to commuter rails within 10 minutes of every corner of my district. And there are 4 major highways that ring my district, but no significant options or planning opportunities to connect via ground transportation to those commuter rail stations. And so consequently, folks in the 15th Middlesex district are among the most egregious offenders in terms of driving into Boston and polluting our air. And we need to get all people who have access to commuter rail stations to use them more frequently. And this is really about working with property owners, similar to business improvement districts, where you have private property owners commit funding up front. And then you have the municipality also participate in the state. That's the concept behind it, but I think we need to look at what other states are doing. And I believe this will really help augment what TMAs are doing and expand the available funding for RTAs. So it's not intended to compete with them, but actually be additive in value. So I don't know if there are any questions. I submitted a 2-page summary. I'm not sure, Sandy, if they have the summary that I submitted in December. If not, I could circulate that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I haven't, and I have not yet circulated to the committee, but staff have seen it, and we can circulate it to the committee upon request or possibly at the next meeting.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I hope you'll, the one other thing I didn't mention is that this was authorized in the most recent transportation bond bill under the secretary's line item for planning under 6720-2117. Essentially says that the department shall conduct a transit improvement district study.
Okay, thank you very much. And Eric, is that a hand up to ask a question as well?
Yeah. Hi, Michelle. Yes, we've worked on this and talked about this issue for a long time. Which two questions. One is, would you envision the product of this being like trying to find examples or case studies from across the country of like how things like this work, where the biggest challenge, right, is it's easy for a municipality, well, not easy, but it's easier because there's leverage for a municipality to get a new development site to contribute to some type of service, but it's really hard to retroactively go back and say, okay, you employer or developer, you never contributed, but now we want you to retroactively like participate, right?
Yes, that's a big part of it. So I think there's a number of things that we need for data. We need to look at what's happening across the country for best practice models, but we also need to look at some of the innovative shuttle routes that have gotten off the ground in Massachusetts to see what procedures were followed there. And then we need to develop really a legal mechanism to allow us to do that upfront planning and put in something permanent. So, there's a barrier right now for cities and towns to be able to compel private property owners to participate in these shuttles. And the concept that I've been working on really is voluntary. There's a property owner vote that has to be taken along with the municipality has to vote it as well. But I think I've seen in recent years, a lot of TMAs get shuttles off the ground only to have them fail because they didn't do the upfront planning. And I know this group is so focused on planning. The idea is really to create a process that other cities and towns can follow that will be a little bit more foolproof. And developers, it's true, exactly what Eric said. I used to be on the planning board in Lexington, and we would always ask for contributions for TDM, assistance. And some developers would pay into a fund that the town would hold. Some would start their own shuttle, but invariably those shuttles were never open to the public, which really meant that the shuttles weren't all that successful. They had a few handful of employees on them perhaps, but if they were really designed with the municipality hand in glove, I think you would have much better outcomes and much better participation in actual ridership, which I think is critical. So I don't know, Eric, if that entirely answers your question, but I'd like us to be looking at the routes that the TMAs are offering, but also the gaps in access points to commuter rails, the opportunity that exists to create these types of shuttles to get more people onto the commuter rail. I think it's an important concept, and perhaps you already have that data, but when the study is designed, if we can look at really where we need to deploy these types of shuttles, that would also be helpful.
And thank you, Michelle. And my second question is the funding that you have, or the bond authorization. How much is that? Or does it have a dollar amount with it?
Let me look. So I'd have to check. I'm sorry. I think it's the study itself does not have a dollar amount specifically, but it's in the secretary's line item as many millions of dollars. because it's lumped in with a number of other things. But it does say that this shall be one of the projects that's funded in that line item, as opposed to the may options.
Yeah, I'm always confused about the bond authorization and what's a requirement versus what's sort of like an option. But the point would be that MassDOT would have to take, the secretary of the MassDOT would have to take some type of action to initiate that body of work.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Lynn, is that a question?
Yes, it is. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I like this idea. It seems to also mesh a fair amount with T3 micro transit tracking and integration. So maybe this is a question for Sandy. Would this fit into the Community Connections program?
That's a good question, Len. So Community Connections is an investment program, and potentially this findings from a study like this could lead to some changes or policy decisions about the Community Connections program. For those who are not familiar with it, the Community Connections program is the MPO's funding line item within our broader transportation improvement program that sets aside funds for first and last mile connections, and which can fund operating projects. Also, I also manage that, so I'm wearing both hats at the moment. And as long as we're on the topic of like relevant MPO work, there's also the shuttle guidebook that staff put together a couple of years ago, which I will put a link to in the chat in just a moment, which has some relevant research into this as well.
I could see us using something like this as a mechanism for devoting more monies to the Community Connections program. Because I think in a time when we're looking for projects where we can have more stability or more confidence in the cost of what we're putting out, this might be a good idea. So something to take up at the broader MPO. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. And looks like Daniel, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. It was really a comment that I think Sandy mentioned. I was going to mention the program, or the shuttle program guidebook, which I personally have not read completely through, but was wondering if that, I'm not sure the extent to whether the information in there got into this detail about financing. Just sort of looking at that section, it was just a few pages long and seemed to be more focused on startup funding, but sort of wondering, as I guess maybe as Sandy already said, if this is kind of an extension of that existing research.
Yeah, I was not super involved in the guidebook, so maybe, I don't know if Stephen or Annette or someone wants to speak a little bit about the potential relationship there.
Sure, I can speak to that. I think that was kind of the, getting the initial funding, so it didn't go much beyond opportunities for financing. It did talk about one of the important things when you're starting up a shuttle is to think about the longer term and how you will continue funding after the money that started the pilot runs out. So this would be a follow-on, I think, to that study.
Great, thank you. And it looks like next on my list is Representative Machino.
Good morning. It's so nice to be with the MPO today. I wish it was in person. I miss you guys. I'm here to speak in favor of, I think it's on your list is T-9, and you refer to it as the capacity constraints in the Boston South Shore corridor. Once I became a state rep, I started looking at, from my district's perspective, transportation, in particular commuter transit in, but also reverse commute out, and started sort of wondering why people were complaining to me about the commuter rail. And essentially what I started to glean was that the current commuter rail capacity, sort of Boston South, is restricted due to several sections of single track along that main line that runs along the Southeast Expressway, which I think you referred to as the Old Colony commuter rail line. So in my various conversations and sort of research in terms of where the planning and things were at, what I concluded was and decided to reach out to Sandy and propose was a corridor study to really see how we might improve that commuter rail capacity from Braintree to South Station. And I'm hoping that it will include both the planning and conceptual engineering so that we would have a good understanding of the dynamic area that's there and all of the existing uses as well as potential uses, and then have something that would take the next steps for solutions and planning and projects. I would, in my mind, a key piece of that study is really identifying where the single track choke points are. I'm particularly interested in the ones that constrain Kingston Plymouth line and the Greenbush line. However, it's obviously needs to be a much broader concept because now you'll have Old Colony coming in further up, and we should always be looking towards the future and the full range of possibilities there. You know, in my mind, the study is really about creating a more robust, reliable commuter rail system. And I see that as connecting the South Shore to Boston, and given some of the planning that you're doing, it potentially beyond. I see it as an economic development, tourism, access to healthcare, arts, culture, amenities. I mean, I see a lot of real tangible benefits to undertaking this work and moving towards practical solutions to be implemented. And I think it's incredibly timely right now because as we're in the pandemic, I know that the MBTA is rethinking what the commute looks like and what work looks like, and to be innovative. And of course, we are doing a lot of visioning and planning for the future, but also we now have climate change legislation and electrification. So I think it's actually a really incredibly timely suggestion, and I'm happy to answer any questions about sort of where the ideas came from and what I, as a novice, envision. But I would really encourage you all to think about it. I think the South Shore, and I heard Rep. Ciccolo talk about the commute or the North Shore. I'm here to tell you that you know, right now it might only take you 50 minutes to get in, but as soon as we get back to work, that's going to change. And the traffic down on the South Shore, both commuting into the city as well as trying to get around my district in the larger South Shore region, is really changed dramatically, and it's choking off any real economic possibilities. So I hope you'll consider this.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Representative Machina?
Well, I'm going to take that from this group as a good sign.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all your help, and thank you for your consideration.
Sure. Oh, looks like we do have a question from Tom Kadzis.
Yeah, it's not a question other than I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have to remember that when Governor Well implemented his commuter incentive, it was a big deal, but they did cut costs. And I know, and they did do a lot of single tracks. For example, on the Needham line, which I take, there's a lot of single tracks, and it has the bed for 2 tracks. Representative, I think it's a great idea. I think it really makes sense to take a look at this on all the lines, and we're all familiar with the challenges on the South Shore. I think it's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to throw that in.
I really appreciate that. You know, and I know it's not easy to do these things, but I'm hoping that Sandy and his team think it's interesting. But you know, when we looked at Greenbush, I mean, that was supposed to be mitigation for the big dig, and so I think having spent that money, we really owe it to ourselves to to really make that robust and for it to really fulfill its intended purposes. And I mean, that was a lot of money. So I mean, we've invested a lot already in these rails. And I could tell you on the South Shore, people want to take the Greenbush line. And in my mind, it's, you know, the hesitation for some people is reliability. And that's both, that's really a scheduling thing and convenience. But it's really reliability is the issue. And, you know, there's just any number of places where you have those choke points and it's a cascading effect. And I hadn't realized this, but to our chagrin, you know, now that it competes with the Kingston Plymouth line to some respects, I mean, that also has, I feel like we sort of gutted that one. So I feel like we've added, but we haven't added the overall ridership. I feel like what we've done is sort of reached a capacity on that old colony line. So thank you so much for your interest. I really appreciate that remark.
Looks like Lynn, do you have a question?
I was holding back because I wasn't sure to what extent we were going to, even though in the last comment I said that I like the idea voicing our indications of support. So I'm going to include a question in this. To what extent do you think this fits in with the MBTA's like rail initiative, new rail initiative?
Is that a question for Director?
It's a question for I guess at this point, the representative, I'm not sure if anyone here is from the MBTA Keolis to talk to that.
So, you know, the visioning that that the MBTA right now is doing on its commuter rail, and actually I would encourage everyone to take a look at. I haven't looked at it recently, just because of the pandemic and we've been working from home, but my recollection of the MBTA's visioning is really more about how to transition for electrification, for you know, for connectivity. And so I actually think that this will fit in to the kinds of things that the MBTA is thinking about and is looking to the future on. That's a visioning statement, and it doesn't. You know, what the MBTA or Keolis would have to do is to really take each of those, look to each sort of segment or section of their commuter rail and think about what does this mean in this space. And I don't doubt that they have started thinking along those lines, but the reports and the visioning things that I've seen are very high level. This is a pragmatic solution, and it's meant, what I'm really intending is for us to take a real hard look at, like, I want you guys to actually come out of this and say, okay, we need to acquire these rights of ways, or, whoa, you know, we're getting down to Savin Hill and there might not be room. We might have to do a tunnel. Like, I want you to come out with some really pragmatic things. Whereas what the MBTA has been doing is much more high level and sort of broad stroke costs. But I see it very much as anticipating where they're headed, and I see it very much as fitting in with the kinds of things that they're interested in doing.
Right. Well, here's my take. I mean, and that is that what would help me is for someone from the MBTA or Keolis to come to us and say, you know what, we are really interested in this too, and if you bring out something positive from this, we would potentially move forward with it. Not a commitment, but a real level of interest and a concern, especially for an aid case study, that we do it. We present it to them and they're like, okay, well, thank you very much. So I just would, if you could get someone from the MBTA or Keolis, someone to advocate for this along with you, that would be helpful to me.
I did share it with, thank you, that's a great suggestion. So I did share it with the general manager. I just thought it was important that he know what his state representatives are up to.
Yeah.
And I have not pestered him for something like that, only because right now he's engaged in a robust dialogue with Congressman Lynch and trying to deal with all of the pandemic, but I will absolutely do that. I've also shared this with MEPC and with the South Shore Chamber, because I see them as partners, and they're gonna each have reasons why they think it's important. I have started sharing this with my legislative colleagues, with Chairman Strauss in particular, but I've also shared it with like Representative Cusack, who, you know, he'd love for the trains not to be idling in his district, right? When they're waiting, that's where they're idling. So I think it's interesting. Everybody has kind of either an economic or commuter or you know, public health lens to these different things, but I'd be happy, I'd be delighted to do this. I'm serious about this, and I'll be advocating for it.
Yeah, and just to understand where I'm coming from, I'm all for studies. I love them. And if we had a lot of money, it'd be like, yes, definitely go for it. But it's 80K, and we don't have a whole lot to spend. And so we're going to have to really justify taking this big a chunk out of the budget to study something that the MBTA may very well just not do anything with. So that's it. Thank you.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. And I will take whatever you give me, and I will actually then seek the funding. I'm in for the long haul, just so everyone knows. You're not getting rid of me yet.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate your great feedback. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. And Lynn, to your point, so this universe is this is the first time we're discussing the final public version of it. When we go out to sort of on our own think about how we would rank them and how we prioritize these studies, I will be sitting down with MBTA staff at the staff level internally to go over sort of their thoughts on the ones that impact them as well. So we should get a little more feedback at that point as well.
Thank you for the guidance. I appreciate that.
So next up, looks like we've got Johanna, Sepka.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, all. My name is Johanna Sepka from Conservation Law Foundation. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I wanted to speak in support of the study identified in the universe table T4, the bus electrification study. We see bus electrification as a key target and opportunity in climate goals, as well as public health benefits. And we know that we need a lot more information before we can start to implement. And so the proposal that we submitted with Transit Matters and others in a January 15th letter identifies the 5 key components that we think this study should include that are identified in the table here. And I will keep it brief in the interest of time, and thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe we have several other questions and public comments about this particular study, so I'll move on to the next person on the speakers list. Looks like next up we have Ari Offsebit. Looks like you're muted.
Unmute. Ari Offsebit, Institute for Transportation Development Policy, and in keeping things brief, I will mostly just echo what Johannes just said in support of item T4, and that it is, I think it scores highly on the scoring criteria. Point out that the MBTA and RTAs use 10 million gallons of diesel fuel per year for their bus fleet, so this is a big impact on pollution, and a lot of that pollution is in some of our lowest income neighborhoods and areas with highest pollution already. And diesel particulate pollution can be very important, and that this will be important as we look to improve and increase bus service across the Commonwealth. And I will send my full comments in and then in an email. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Next on my list, I have Michelle Cook.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be brief. My name is Michelle. I am co-founder of Urban Outdoors Association, and I'm here to support the Blue Hills access study. I'm speaking on behalf of Boston residents who not only need but want access to the Blue Hills, and we just feel like the study is going to be something that is needed for the communities and those who are living in the Boston areas to have access. And that's all I'll say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I actually have a question for Sandy. So Sandy, in the Community Connections program, we have that Canton Royal Street project. Is that funded, or is that what we're going to be discussing today about sort of keeping that funding in fiscal year 22?
So that was a project that the MPO committed to funding last year. It hasn't been formally programmed, but the MPO is kind of basically committed to it. And it's 3 years of funding, 2022 through 24. The relationship to something like what the study proposes is a little bit, I think it's not really there because that's a commuter shuttle project.
Right.
So it would be weekday only,
Right.
which, could potentially provide some benefit to access along these lines, but it would not be, I spend time in the Blue Hills on weekends. That's when a lot of people are up there.
No, I agree. In fact, but I couldn't help but look at the geography of that and go, oh, Mattapan Square, straight down Blue Hill Avenue, right through the Blue Hills, probably going right by all these trail areas, and thinking, my goodness, is there any way we could, leverage that? And yeah, I agree with you. It's running at commuting times, not on the weekends when most people probably would want to do it. But maybe that's something we could think a little bit about. I throw that out there because I feel like we can study this, but at the end of the day, I think we're talking about either better bicycle connection out there or some type of transit service to get out there. That's what I would think. Is that correct, Michelle? Is that what you're thinking too?
Yes, absolutely. So definitely the biking component. So I love biking, but also for those who don't bike or have families that want to travel from Mattapan Square. I think it's just thinking for the commute for myself, getting from Mattapan. I don't live far from, I'm in Dorchester, and getting from Mattapan to the Blue Hills. I have accessibility to either bike or drive, but not everyone has that or want to bike. So having something like that, particularly on the weekends where people can bring their families, because most of us are working, but to be able to bring their families out together, I think that would be an ideal situation to look at. Absolutely.
And is that like going down Blue Hill Avenue through Milton and then is that the location of where I'm not as familiar with like where trail access sites are and that kind of thing?
Right. So I'm terrible with streets, so please forgive me. I'm great with landmarks. So coming at the end of coming from Mattapan Square, I'm saying River Street going up. I don't know what that street is, but going straight up and being able to get maybe to the Trailside Museum, maybe having that access there would be something ideal.
Yeah. And currently that shuttle would run down Route 138, as does the MBTA 716 bus currently, which has a limited schedule on Saturdays and doesn't run at all on Sundays. And on weekdays, they would swing a right coming south and go into the Royal Street office area. But about the same distance to the left, to the east, there is Houghton's Pond, which is one of the big parks and attractions in the Blue Hills. So this is all kind of in the same geographic area. And it's definitely, if we're to go ahead with the study, we would engage the Milton and Canton town governments and the Neponset Valley TMA and all the other stakeholders for all of these projects together on the study as well.
Well, I guess I'll just do one last plug for, we should, I think, engage the TMA a little bit, if we're going to fund the weekday service, to see if there's any additional resources or demand on their end to maybe even, do something on the weekends. I think they're using the Town of Canton's Council on Aging vans, correct? Is that the?
I don't recall off the top of my head what their plans are. I think it's 2 or 3 different shuttle routes, so it's probably a combination of that and some contracted vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
And Mark, did you have something to add on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out on the bicycle side for access to the Blue Hills from the Mattapan areas that we've done corridor studies in the past couple of years for both Route 138 and 28. And both of our studies are recommending much improved bicycle accommodations along those routes as well for the people who bike. I know it doesn't address the transit part of it, but at least we're trying to recommend improvements for the bicycle access to the area as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And then we have a comment from Stephen Andrews of CPS staff about the 240 bus that runs past there. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the Brockton area transit bus that also runs right past there. So there's a lot of overlapping services that don't seem to serve this particular need, it sounds like. So looks like next up is Matthew Peterson.
Great. So I also want to speak in support of the bus electrification item T4 study. There are multiple folks here, so I'll be pretty brief, but I did just want to emphasize that one of the reasons we believe this study is really important is that it would provide a useful resource for transportation and transit providers all across the region, from the MBTA to RTAs to community groups, to better and municipalities to better understand bus electrification options and technologies available, and be able to kind of engage in this discussion about how we electrify our transit moving forward with a better kind of basis. I really think about the transit priority guidebook that CTPS put out a few years ago. And I really think that a similar resource that kind of lays out what all the options are for bus electrification would be really helpful for the discussion in the region.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew Peterson or Ari or Johanna who spoke about bus electrification? Seeing none. I will add that the bus electrification conversation has come up at every other MPO meeting I've attended, not outside of the Boston region. So it's certainly a hot topic.
Yeah, I mean, and I just say, like, I'm saying the Boston region and saying all that because I think that that's true, that it is really important for this region. But of course, any study that got produced like this would have application for any MPO across the Commonwealth or beyond. I mean, I think that this kind of study that kind of lays out all the options, compares them, and gives you kind of just a ground basis understanding of the information is really helpful for anyone engaging with the idea of bus electrification, figuring out what would work best. So.
Great, thank you. All right, and looks like that wraps up the public comment. I heard mention of sort of more formal written comments coming in. We welcome those, of course, and those will be sent to all of the board members if those are sent in.
I do want to draw people's attention to one that came in this morning before the meeting from Olivia Nichols of Green Roots, written comment on the same bus electrification study, which I emailed out to committee members just before the meeting. So if you haven't seen that, you can check your email at your convenience.
Great, thanks, Sandy. And that'll be posted on the meeting calendar.
Yes,
eventually.
indeed.
Yeah, great. All right, so we're actually running a little short on time here. So I propose that because we do need to at least set the stage for our universe discussion in the future, I propose that we table the agenda, the meeting summary agenda item, and go on to talking about sort of next steps for the universe of proposed studies, if that's okay with everybody. Great. So let's move on to agenda item 4. So I believe the way this agenda item was originally formulated, we would go through each individual line item with a little note. I think it might make more sense if we start with sort of laying the groundwork for expectations and then allow members to ask any questions they may have at the moment. So Sandy, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. And I agree that that's a good way to go about it, given limited time available. So basically, I think most of the committee members are familiar with our process with this, but we have 2 meetings, this one and April 8th, dedicated to discussing this universe of studies. And this is a chance for staff to answer questions. We'll give a very brief overview of each of the studies. And you already heard from many of the people from outside of staff who proposed other studies. And thank you to all of you for coming to comment on that. It's been a great discussion already. And after these 2 meetings, I will send out a survey to the committee and another one internally to staff, asking you to rank your priorities for which studies we should do. At the same time, staff will be working on developing our budget. We'll come back with a staff recommendation, looking now like toward the end of April, hopefully taking in some of the budget information into account. And at that point, the committee can decide on a final list of studies to be funded. But for now, I think just any general questions about process, about anything you've heard thus far are good. And in the next meeting, we can dive into going through each of the studies in order and hopefully get through them all at that April 8th meeting.
Great, thank you, Sandy. So any questions on that timeline and process? Lynn?
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't think we're going to get through them all in one more meeting. I mean, not one more 60-minute meeting. I just want to be realistic about that. I mean, I think because I think we don't want to shortchange the discussion about these because we're running out of time. So if we need to factor in more time, let's try to do that ahead of time instead of getting to April 8th and then trying to cram something into everyone's tight schedule. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Daniel?
Thanks. I mean, I agree with what Len is saying, and I'm going to need to leave in a couple minutes, so I have some buffer space between this meeting and the MPO meeting. Is this a good time to ask a couple of questions, or do you want to talk process first?
I think we should probably talk process first and hold the questions for the next meeting.
Oh, well, I had some questions that are more like questions of maybe to come back at the next meeting. Don't necessarily need answers now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so those more like can we more like when we come back at the next meeting, can we have more clarity? I wanted to ask about the bus electrification. I agree and understand that this is an important project, but I'm wondering to the extent like how this connects into what the MBTA is or might already be doing, and I mean, sort of to avoid duplicative work, but also it also kind of feels like something the T should be covering. That's just my opinion, but just sort of wondering, navigating the issues of, should we be the ones that are sort of covering this, or is this more of like a T project? And so that sort of question. So yeah, so that's what I was curious about that.
Okay. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. In short, it's sort of my perspective from MassDOT that this is something that the T should be covering and is already doing a lot of work on. And I'll add that the Rail and Transit Division is also doing a lot of work for the RTAs on this front. So there's work underway, and I'm not quite sure what the status is. So that's sort of what my task is for the next few weeks. But because this initiative does have a lot of public support behind it, and it is sort of a key priority for a lot of the stakeholders in the region and statewide, it seems like it's important to at least include it in the universe and discuss it and keep highlighting it, because we are partners with the MBTA in how we do our work, and we want to make sure that we're being upfront about those concerns that are coming from the public to us.
Yeah, thank you, and I agree totally that it is important. And so my question was, I guess more about the financial responsibility, or who's, if that's being covered somewhere else, then we can have more other discrete studies, that we also think are important. And I'll continue to put a plug in for the congestion pricing, and I'd certainly be curious to know similarly if there's it's an issue that's come up over the last several years, and it sort of continually gets pushed off, and I'm wondering if I'd like to know by the next meeting if that's there's still issues with moving that forward, or if it because it is anyway. So I'll just speak in favor of that again if we sort of take a look another look at that. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. All right. Any other questions from committee members? And I will add that we will be looking into when we can schedule an additional meeting at a minimum in April. so that we have time to discuss these. And whether that's before an MPO meeting or sort of on an off week so that we have more time to discuss. Sounds like there's an appetite for having a longer meeting. So we'll look at those options as well. Eric?
Great. Yes, I would second that about finding more time. So that's good. And while we have a few minutes, I do have a question. There are two studies. There's the swap study that there was public comment about, but there's another freight study that also sounds a little like that has some potential overlap. And I was wondering if staff could talk about that. Is there potential overlap there? Is there potential way to consolidate, or are those two discrete bodies of work?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So there is a little bit of overlap, and in fact, in talking about the swap study, I ran some of the ideas from the other one, which is something I wrote up past some of the swap area planners, and they seem kind of excited about some of the concepts. I think there are kind of two different directions it's going in. One is very specifically about e-commerce and warehousing, which I know your team has done a lot of work on, Eric, and building on that work and building on some work that I know Bill Cudner from our team has already done. Some basic research into it. And then the other one is more focused on generating mode shift, especially road to rail. And that is kind of could be done on a micro scale or a macro scale, depending on, funding and what the committee's desires would be. So I think there is definitely potential to merge them in some format, but they could also end up being two different concepts.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Sandy. Any other questions or comments on the universe as it stands now and the process before the next meeting? Matthew Peterson.
Yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I did just want to emphasize, I guess, to talk about the bus electrification thing. Part of the reason we propose this is because we believe that some of the conversation from the state agencies about this topic has been pretty quick to down select some of the options available for bus electrification. And so what we want to do through this was ensure that communities, both state and MBTA transit providers such as RTAs, but really also TMAs and any other people who are interested in transit electrification have a more complete understanding of the opportunities and issues with different technologies. I think it's like, there are multiple stakeholders in any electrification process. There's utilities, there's municipalities, there's right-of-way owners, there's all sorts of people. And so we wanted to have that really kind of free and open discussion about like a study of all the different options available and ensure that there's a lot of more even distribution of the information about these technologies.
Great, thank you. All right, seeing no other discussion on this agenda item, we'll move on to item 5. Any other members' items? Okay, not seeing any. So we'll move on to agenda item 6, next meeting. Sandy?
Yeah, thanks. So I think we have some discussing to do. One idea I wanted to throw out there is potentially holding the committee meeting after the MPO meeting on April 8th. I can send out an email to survey the committee on availability if Ben, if you're available then as the chair. We've done that in the past a few times when we really need to dig into the universe and have less restricted time. And I know there's also an ANF committee meeting before the MPO meeting on the 8th. So then we could deconflict that by moving this one after. But I think the best way to hash out if everybody's available is probably to do that by email.
Great, that sounds good to me. Eric?
I was going to say I absolutely support that. I think April 8th in the afternoon would be great.
Great. All right, I will send out an email probably this afternoon asking people if they're available for that. And if we can get a quorum, I think we'll go ahead with that if the chair is good with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to confirm because it overlaps with an Old Colony public meeting. So I just have to make sure I'm available at that time.
So is this line?
Yep.
I mean, would people be willing to consider an April 1st standalone meeting in the morning? I just want to put that out as an option. If it's a no-go for people, I mean, I know it's a week, from now. I mean, if it's a no-go, then of course, let's go with the 8th. But if it is a possibility, then And I think it provides a little more optionality in how that should use that outside of options, But so I just put that out there.
Right, yeah, we can include that in the scheduling emails that Sandy sends out, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think we just have to check that that's adequate public notice for a meeting, and we can do that on the staff end.
Yeah, I think you just need 48 hours. You need 72 max.
All right, Tom O'Rourke.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the MPO is meeting on the 8th. Are we meeting on the 1st as well, or no?
No, we are not meeting on the 1st.
Just the 8th.
Just, well, it'll be the 8th, and then someone correct me if I'm wrong, then the 29th. So it's actually a bigger gap between those two.
Okay,
That's
all
correct.
right.
That's
Thanks. I didn't
correct.
know that. Thank you. All right.
All right, so be on the lookout for some scheduling emails from Sandy, and we will figure out the exact date and time of the next meeting at that point. Right now, it's currently scheduled for April 8th. And looks like that's it. So can I get a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn, Len Higgins.
Second, Tom Bent.
All right, then without objection, we are adjourned.